I'm Richard Cumley, creator of Captain Canuck, and you are listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Richard Cumley as he provides an update on Captain Canuck. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. If you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/truenorthcountrycomics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Originally from Oxford, England, Richard now resides in Ontario. He's worked as a commercial artist, writer, and creator since his teens. Richard has written and illustrated children's books, magazine articles, syndicated newspaper features, greeting cards, storyboards for commercials, copy and illustration for print and TV advertising, promotional videos, and for television he's done Star Rider and the Peace Machine, Steel Chameleon, Alien Angel, Trumpet, Wabbits, and Brain Quest 2. In the comic book arena, Richard is known as a penciler, inker, letterer, colorist editor, publisher, convention organizer, and more. However, he's best known for creating Captain Canuck. Captain Canuck is a reboot of the classic Canadian comic book hero created in 1975 by Richard and Ron Leishman. Now published by Lev Gleason Comic House, this all-new series reimagines Canuck as a kinetic and accessible 21st century icon. Born of the True North and tested in war, Captain Canuck is thrust into battle at the head of the global crisis intervention agency called Equilibrium. He must find his way as a warrior, leader, and ultimately hero to save humanity from the machinations of Mr. Gold, Blue Fox, and the even more menacing forces that watch from the shadows. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Cumley as he provides an update on Captain Canuck. So, Richard Cumley, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
You're very welcome.
I appreciate your time. Before we get started, though, with the interview, I want to ask you, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
I don't have much on my bedside. I usually read off the iPad, and the last thing I read is a book by, a book that I've read before in it, but it's pretty deep stuff or a lot of information in it, and it's all about the apostasy and the restoration. I'm a Latter-day Saint, and I read a lot of stuff about church history. So that's the last thing I've read, but it's all on the iPad now. The news, emails, all of that stuff. We have tons of books in our house,
right,
and I've read many of them, but I'm reading more iPad and less book lately.
Sure. When we last met up, it was at Cottage Comic-Con in Orillia over the summer, which is a great event. But that's just one of the many appearances you've been making at conventions recently. And I know that for a while that we've both been at home with the pandemic, but now it seems like you're out and about everywhere at the convention circuit. Wondering what it's like returning to that scene, and what's it been like interacting with fans again?
Well, I wouldn't say many. I think I did maybe 5 or 6 since the summer. And so it hasn't been a huge amount, but it's been doable. No, it's been fine. I'm happy to be out there, happy to talk to people. Let me see. I was in London for both of their conventions, comic conventions. Of course, we did Toronto. I was there for a couple of days. Went down to New Jersey in July, and I'm going back to another con in New Jersey and one in Scranton, Pennsylvania soon. So doing more comic conventions in the United States. So, and we did travel out to see my son who lives in Memramcook, New Brunswick, which happens to be about 20 miles south of Moncton. And I think you'll find a few Ontarians moving out there, by the way, because it's lovely out there, beautiful province. Fredericton is a beautiful city. Moncton is the fastest growing and the largest city in the province, but yeah, no, I mean, the big attraction out there is lower house prices. Yeah, anyway, so we were there, did some store signings. Did one in Fredericton, one in Moncton. The one in Moncton, the timing wasn't great. The hurricane came through on the Friday and petered out by Saturday afternoon. Well, Moncton wasn't really hard hit, but parts closer to the shore were harder hit.
Yeah, a lot of folks were,
Yeah, we were
got hit
going
by
to
that.
go to Prince Edward Island. I think it was like the 21st of September or something like that.
Yeah.
And but we didn't go because they had a lot of damage. A lot of people didn't have power.
Right.
So we didn't go to that. Did 2 store signings, one in Boston area and one in Albany area, Schenectady to be more accurate, on the way back. And it was a great trip. My wife and I enjoyed it. I mean, our main objective was to visit our son Christian, and that was, a lovely visit, him and his family, and then coming back through Maine. Maine is beautiful. Massachusetts, of course, New York State has a lot of beautiful areas. It was a great trip. It was nice talking to Americans. There's a lot of American Captain Canuck fans.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
what was it like interacting with them? Did you have to educate them at all, or did they actually know the character and want to know more about him?
Well, both, I guess. I mean, I had some really diehard fans down there, people who had been subscribers right from the beginning. And, so that's always a bit of a surprise. I have quite a few people who had collected Captain Canuck right from the beginning that I met and signed comics for in New Jersey, Morristown, New Jersey, where we were in July. And I was a bit surprised how many people had the comics, had the original series. And I've asked Americans before. I was at a con, Heroes Con, down in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 6 years ago, and had a lot of American Captain Canuck fans. And these are people with thick Southern accents who'd never been to Canada. So I was a little curious, and I did ask a few of them, happy you like Captain Canuck. How come?
Right,
And they just said they liked the character, and it was different, and, they just liked the writing and the art, and that's all good. I was happy to hear all of that.
Sure.
And the fact that they didn't discriminate because he was a foreign entity.
Ah, okay.
So, anyways, it was all good.
Good to hear.
Anyways,
good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, wanted to ask you, I hear that Captain Canuck number 16 is about to come out, or it's on store shelves now. Wondering if you talk a little bit about the significance of that publication of that issue.
Well, 16, I have copies. I had copies with me in New Brunswick. By the way, one of the places I stopped was in Quebec City, which is crazy beautiful. Oh my goodness, what a treasure that city is, the walled city and the history there.
Yes.
And I visited 2 comic book stores, and they were huge on Captain Canuck. I had stuff with me that they bought, and in both cases, they spoke very little English. In the one case, the manager spoke excellent English. She learned all her English in Texas, by the way. So that's where our Quebecers go.
Right.
Not to Ontario. And I have to mention number 15, because number 15 was completed in 1980. And it was written by George Freeman. And art is mostly by George Freeman. That story begged for a conclusion. In the 2014 summer special, we wrote kind of a conclusion for that story. I wrote it, George Freeman illustrated it, and his wife colored it. And those guys are mega talented, as you're well aware.
Right.
Both of them, both Laurie and George. When looking at the story in the summer special, the 2014 summer special, I'm reading 15 again, reading, the summer special story again. I came to the conclusion that we needed to bridge what took place at the ending of 15 and the story that was in the summer special. So I wrote and illustrated and colored and lettered 7 pages to precede the 13 pages that George Freeman did. And that is what issue number 16 is. So that is, a detailed kind of overview of number 16. I like it. I mean, George did a beautiful job back in 2014 on it. And, so anyways.
No, that's good. Did you work closely with George on this particular section at all, or?
George lives in Winnipeg. I mean, the last time I saw him was about a year ago. My wife and I had dinner with him. His wife was sick. Unfortunately, Lori was sick, and so she couldn't come out with us. But closely, phone, email.
Right.
I didn't sit in the same room with him or anything. I stay in touch with both George and Claude Saint-Aubin. I consider them lifelong friends. I mean, they came along in 1975, shortly after I started the comic book series, and as far as I'm concerned, they were godsend. They were a huge help. So many fans of George's art out there.
Well, I want to switch gears a wee bit and talk about getting your comments and thoughts about Captain Canuck becoming an even greater part of Canadian culture. I mean, we've seen him on a stamp. His books are everywhere. But I'm wondering, did you happen to see that Captain Canuck reference or appearance on the CBC show Son of a Critch? It was on the bedroom wall of a young Mark Critch. I shouted out to my family. We were watching. I said, wow, look at that. There's Captain Canuck. What were your thoughts on it?
First of all, they contacted me months before they went into production to get permission to get rights, and they did buy a little bit of stuff. They needed some posters, and I needed to supply them with older stuff as well. And some of the stuff is, more correct to the era. It's supposed to be taking place in the 1980s.
Yes.
The Son of Critch series. And so, I sent them a bunch of stuff, and we gave them permission. We were happy to, and I've seen some episodes. I haven't seen every episode of it, but I have seen a few, and it's very charming. How they got what's his name? The British actor
Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah, wow. I mean, he's an amazing actor. I mean, he's just. I mean, all the cast is good on that show.
Sure.
It's very well done.
Not as equally as a parent, but I've seen Captain Canuck have his own sandwich at the famous Lakeview restaurant. Have you seen that?
Yes. Yes, of course. Now, that sandwich is the reason, without that sandwich and the naming of that sandwich, we wouldn't probably be talking about this today.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that now?
Way back in 2009, I think it was in the fall, it was an email, and it was started with an email from Thadi Hakim, and who was CEO of Lev Gleason Publications and Comic House. He wasn't at the time. He has a restaurant in Toronto called the Lakeview on Dundas, and it's a famous restaurant. It was a diner back in 1932, and they've maintained the charm of that era. Any work they've done in the restaurant is basically, it still looks like a 1930s diner, except a new 1930s diner, and they're open almost all the time. So, anyways, Fatty contacted me, and that was the beginning. After I gave him permission, and we started talking, and I got to know him, and we became friends, and then he had all these ideas and aspirations, and eventually we formed kind of a business arrangement where I licensed the rights to Captain Canuck to him, and he started Chapter House, which is now Comic House. So that sandwich, if he didn't want to name, he was a Captain Canuck fan from the age of 6.
Wow.
Yeah. He tells me the story, and if you read the little editorial in the 2014 summer special, you can read about it there. He's a 6-year-old. His father gives him some money, and he says you can spend it on whatever you want. And what is he? He's walking through some kind of a market area, and he sees Captain Canuck, and that's what he buys.
Wow, that's cool. There you go.
That was the beginning, I guess.
And this year, also, I refer back to our meeting at the the Cottage Comic Con. Captain Canuck is now an action figure. That must be a proud moment for you, isn't it?
That's the second action figure.
Ah.
The first one, Big B Enterprises. They did the what do you call it? Omega? The kind of the older style. That's kind of been sold through. They manufactured a bunch of them, and those were hit the market in 2015, and they've kind of, but those are kind of done. You know what I mean? They're not going to make any more of them.
Right.
This is a newer action figure with a different company, and yeah, it looks good quality. Of course, it's meant to be more of a collectible than anything else.
And speaking of popularity, I mean, we've been talking about Captain Canuck like we know it inside out. But for those who are coming to the character for the very first time and uncertain about where to begin, what do you recommend they do? Like, what do you think would be the best book for them to get started on?
I mean, my obvious answer would be to start with number one, the first number one that came out in 1975, and go from there. Now, IDW published the original series, what we refer to as the original series. They did it in 2 hardcovers, and then they did a compendium, a paperback compendium that had issues 1 to 14 and the summer special and a bunch of other stuff in the back end of it as well. So, I mean, those are out of print, but Fatty published the Captain Canuck compendium, and this is this is about 2016, I think that came out, and that's no longer in print. Those have sold out, and you can still find them in the odd store. They're getting both of those. All of those books are getting harder and harder to find, but now and then you'll come across them in a store somewhere. But those would be, I mean, if I were to gift somebody, and I happen to have copies of either the compendium from Chapter House, which is now Comic House, or the IDW compendium, that's what I would hand somebody. But other than that, I mean, the series that Kalman did, starting in 2015, with the issue number 1 that came out then, I mean, Kalman did a great job. I mean, the writing and the art, they're just, I don't think I praised his work enough. And I mentioned that to him. There was a little bit of a shock factor when they showed me the new costume. I liked it.
Right.
This is Kalman's design. And we're kind of, moving on to another look from there. And making some of the key characters like Redcoat and Quebec females when they originally were male agents. I mean, I had to, how do I put it, adjust to this new reality kind of thing. And but I did, and they did a great job.
Sure. Now you just want to touch back on this. The books are out of print. You're saying, yet we're in this digital age. Do you think there's going to be a time when Captain Canuck will be available digitally, where you can go back and get these books that are out of print?
There are issues available online already through, what's the big one?
Comixology?
Yeah, you're talking to an old
okay,
here,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm not totally with it, with the digital age, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Now, Comic House is going to release the original series in a new format, because the compendium is out of print. Rather than just print more of it, they're repackaging it, and they're just trying to make it a little more appealing, just doing more stuff with it. And I think what they're doing is kind of like what IDW did when they first released the original series, releasing it in 2 volumes. And
something to look forward to. That should be good.
Yeah, so they're going to do that. Whether or not the original series will be available online, I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And I don't know when. I don't know if Fatty has a clear plan to to release them digitally, I really don't know. We'd have to ask him.
Right. Sure. Well, speaking about the future, you've been dropping some hints about something called Captain Canuck Reborn. I wonder if there's anything you could say about that project.
Well, I'm happy to talk about that. Just a bit of history here. The last issue came out in late of the original series, and that's issue number 14. That came out in 1980. Number 15 was actually finished, but the company, of which I was no longer a part of, and I had some problems with the other two owners, investors, and I was, before 15 was completed. In fact, I really had nothing to do with issue number 15. I was out, and then the company folded. So about, I guess, 6 months later, something like that. So 14 was the last issue published, and 15 was the last issue that was completed. And like I said, it sat there until 2005 when I did number 15 as a black and white, very limited numbered and signed series.
Ah, right.
And that sold very quickly. And it's now kind of a pricey collector's item to get a hold of a copy. I didn't even keep a copy myself. So in 93, I started working on it sometime in 92. I did Captain Canuck Reborn, the series. There's only 4 issues of Reborn, which I started in 93, and the last issue came out in 96. So, again, this is, not a lot of funding behind me and struggling along kind of thing. Those issues are going to be collected, but they have to be recolored. Pretty well all of it has to be recolored because the coloring that was done back then, first of all, we don't have the files anymore, and second, the coloring wasn't very well done. I had a company not too far, a company that doesn't exist anymore. They were basically just graphic designers who did the coloring, and it just didn't turn out very well. I wasn't happy with it, and so we're gonna recolor it. Basically, all 4 issues are going to be recolored and released as basically in a trade paperback form, as a collected series. So the other thing that happened in 95 and 96, I did a newspaper strip. And so that, and the stories from the newspaper strip and Reborn were, it was the same, we were dealing with the same characters in the same story. And in fact, issue number 3, so it was 0, 1, 2, and 3. Issue number 3 is really the one of the stories, the first story of the newspaper strip, in color, will be what number 3. I'm probably confusing people by trying to explain this, but
sure.
So it's 0, 1, 2, and 3. That will be collected, all recolored, remastered as a trade paperback.
Ah, that should be exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it gives me a chance to, I'm going to add a few pages, and I'm recoloring it is good because it's going to look better. All of that stuff, and getting it all into one book. I'll be happy to see that. So.
Absolutely, and others will too, for sure.
Yeah.
I've also I heard rumors about a potential animated series or movie. Can you offer any insight into that?
Well, I can say this much: it's in the works. There is an animation company in Toronto that Fatty has signed an agreement with. It will be, an animated television series. That's still kind of in development. I don't know when it'll come to the small screen, but it'll. I'm thinking it'll probably go into production next year, early next year sometime. It'll go into production, and it's a situation where I don't think anything is nailed down as far as release dates and production dates and all of that stuff. But it's definitely in the works.
Sounds good. Well, Richard, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
One thing I'd like to also mention is the newspaper strip that I did in 95 and 96 is also going to be collected in a book. So the newspaper strip, there was, I think, 5 stories. The way it worked, I'd write the story, and then there'd be a conclusion, and then it would just sort of move into the next adventure, the next saga, so to speak. And I think it was a total of 5 stories. One of the stories was written by Mark Shainblum, and he's a terrific writer. I've got another story in there that we were really happy with by Preston Squire, and he's not a big name in comic books, but and it dealt with separation at the time when we were all in 95, when Quebec separating from Canada was an issue front of mind kind of thing. He did a really good job of it. I know people will love it when they read that story. It just chokes me up sometimes when I see what he did with that story and in real life what happened. You know what I mean? But I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to remain in black and white, so it'll be all the strips that were run by. There was only 8 newspapers that ran the strip. So, and then the other thing that's in the works is we're going to be offering the strip again to Canadian newspapers, and which, if you know how the newspaper industry is kind of struggling nowadays, it's not going to be a real easy chore. But we think we've got a way to make it work for everybody.
Thanks to Richard for the chat. You can discover more about Richard on Instagram at Richard Cumley. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Tumblr at True North Country Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. And if you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/True North Country Comics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.